It's not on? Are you sure you're on the new one? Because we recorded one earlier by accident as we were testing.
That might be what she's looking at.
You might be looking at the one we did earlier when it said device not found. Hopefully there's a new one. Try refreshing the page. Maybe you'll find a new one. You got it? See, Tito's got it. So you just did it wrong. We still got 2 minutes. According to that clock. Is that clock right? 9:28? Okay, so what time have you got?
I got 9:49.
Okay, so that one's about a minute behind.
You're on live right now?
Yes, we're on live already. Okay, well, we're close enough. We'll get started. If you'd like, you can turn to Job chapter 1. We will be there today in verses 6 through 8. Well, we might go a little past that, actually. We do want to do a little bit of review. I've written up on the board. Last week, I forgot to write on anything on the board, so I figured I'd write it in advance so I wouldn't forget it this time. So this is all stuff we will review as we're talking about Job 1, 6 through 8. Last week was our third week. This is our fourth week. We talked last week called A Brief History of Satan. And so let's read those verses again because today's lesson will include more details and discussion about this passage. So Job 1, verses 6 through 8. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Now the term there, the sons of God, came to present themselves. The sons of God is not humans, it is not Christians, it's not believers, although that's the way it's used in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, often sons of God refers to angels. And that's the way it works in Job. In fact, there's another term that makes it even more obvious, which is in Job chapter 38, when God first rebukes Job in verses 4 through 7. God asks Job out of the whirlwind this question: "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? While the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy." It's pretty obvious that on the day that God created the heavens and the earth, there were no humans there. God didn't make Adam and Eve until day 6. So that means that the sons of God have to be angels. And they were there singing and shouting when God created the earth, which also implies that God created angels before he created the heavens and the earth, which also implies that God created time before he created angels, because anything that is not God requires time to exist. Only God is timeless. So we would imagine then that those two things were created first. So there were angels there when God created the heavens and the earth on day 1. Also, I pointed out that the word Satan here in Job is not the proper name Satan. It is the Satan or the Satan. What it means is it's used here as a noun, not as a name. It means adversary, enemy, prosecuting attorney, argumentative one. Basically, it means somebody who's always against you. So in the book of Job, Satan is not exactly named Satan. That became his name because everyone started to know him after the book of Job as the Satan, and so they just started calling him Satan, adversary. So all it is a descriptive name that we use now. It was not his original name. We did learn his original name. We looked at 2 Old Testament passages that describe Satan when he lived in the Garden of Eden. This is another interesting question. It is possible, in fact, that God didn't create Lucifer, that's his name, son of the morning, which is in Isaiah 14, 12 to 15. Maybe God didn't create Lucifer to stay in heaven all the time over his throne. Maybe he created him to be the guardian of the Garden of Eden. It's just one possibility, because it is odd that in Isaiah and Ezekiel both, they talk about his time living in Eden. So he wasn't always living in heaven. He was living in Eden quite a bit. Maybe that was his station. So we looked at Isaiah 14. It calls his name Lucifer. It means son of the morning. That means he was likely either the first angel created, although I shouldn't say angel, angelic being might be a better word. And his sin was to say in his heart, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High. And isn't it interesting that that is exactly the temptation that he used with Eve? When he asked Eve, is it true you can't eat from any of the trees? She says, no, we can eat from all the trees except that tree. And he says, oh, yeah, that's right, that tree. Yeah, if you were to eat from that tree, you'd be like God, knowing good and evil. That was the temptation. That's exactly the thing that he fell for. So he threw the same temptation that he fell for at her, and it worked. Wouldn't it be nice to be like God? And you know, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that idea. It's what we call a half-truth. We're told throughout the New Testament, be like Christ, right? Be like God. Be holy as I am holy. So we are told to wish that. The difference is we are told to wish to be like Christ as he wants us to be, not to be like God in a way he doesn't want us to be. He didn't want Adam and Eve to experience evil. Basically, the devil was telling the truth. You will learn good and evil. It's just that you're going to learn it by doing it. You're not going to learn it by seeing it. So, at any rate, that's interesting that his temptation was the same one that he used on Eve. Then we looked at Ezekiel 28, verses 12 through 18. And this is a really curious passage. Particularly of interest to me was that it mentions that on the day he was created, he received musical instruments. Now, the way it puts it is a little odd. It says, on the day you were created, I gave you musical instruments, but it almost implies like they were a part of his body. So some people believe that he was actually musical, like when he spoke, it was like music, or sang, or he could make his own beat. I mean, he could use his wings if he's a dragon, of course. But the two musical instruments that are mentioned there are timbrels and pipes. Now, timbrels are believed to be tambourines or little drums like Native Americans use, tom-toms, where you can beat them on each side with your hands. So you don't use a stick. A drum is one you use a stick on. A timbrel is one you use your hand on. So whatever instrument it was, whether a tambourine or a tom-tom, that seems to be what Lucifer had, one of them. The other one is pipes, which is sort of like flutes, but more like a recorder, a straight flute, because you blow through it and push the little buttons to block air. So these are the musical instruments. And so some people speculate that Lucifer may have been the leader of worship. He was the one playing the music while all the angels sang. It's a possibility. Now, why a dragon particularly would be good at that is another question altogether. But in Ezekiel 28, twice, the passage calls him, O covering cherub. And I've got that word up here. Just to remind you, cherub is singular. Cherubim is plural. In Hebrew, you add him to make a plural on a noun. So one cherub, multiple cherubs. But he is called the cherub who covers. The other word used in the Bible for cherubim or cherub is living creature. They are never called angels. Not once are they ever called angels. They're called living creatures, which is interesting because it's exactly the same word we use for animals. In Genesis 1, when God created the animals, he created the living creatures. Trying to remember the name. Hayah Kaim or something like that. So anyway, they're not called angels, they're called animals. God's got these animals in heaven, these animal angel beings. Now, the other ones we looked at, though, are different. Well, first of all, let's go over the first war in heaven. We talked about this war in heaven in Revelation chapter 12, verses 2 through 9. The first sin was not Adam and Eve. The first sin was Satan. And once he sinned, he decided, his decision was to try to overthrow God and become like God and raise his throne over God's throne. So it says in verses 7 through 9 of Revelation 12, And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they could not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Notice what he's called there. He's called Satan, devil, dragon, and serpent of old. That serpent of old is going to be interesting and important here shortly. So Satan got allies. When he rebelled in heaven, he was able to get apparently around 1/3 of all the angels to go with him. Not all the angels. And Michael and the rest of the angels were able to throw him and the demons out. They were thrown to earth. The serpent of old is Lucifer, and he's the one who tempted Eve. Now, this is something I want to talk about that we didn't talk about much last week, about the temptation in Eden. When the traditional view that I've always heard and read in most books is that the devil possessed a snake. So he comes into the garden, and like a demon possession, he goes into the snake and takes over its body and uses it to talk to Eve. That's the traditional view. I don't actually agree with that view. I think it's wrong. It's not totally heresy or anything. It's just not correct in my opinion. I believe that Satan was the serpent, and it was not that he just took over a snake. There's a number of reasons to believe that. First of all, how often in the Bible is he called a serpent? Right there in Revelation, he's called the serpent of old. In Ezekiel and Isaiah, he's called the covering cherub, and there are a number of places where he's called a dragon or a serpent. But think of this. After the curse, when God cursed Adam and Eve and then the serpent, what did he curse the serpent? He said, from now on you will crawl around on your belly. Basically, I'm taking away your legs. Okay, now if you believe that it was Satan possessing a snake, that means that before, snakes had legs. And now God has taken away all the snakes' legs from all the snakes on earth. That's one way of thinking of it. If you think of it the way I do, that it was just the serpent, the curse was only on the serpent, the dragon, and he lost his legs. It has nothing to do with the rest of the snakes. That's just my opinion. There's another reason for this opinion. I think I have the verse here. It's 2 Corinthians. Oh, maybe I have it later. There is a verse in 2 Corinthians where it says the serpent tempted Eve. Is that right? That could be it. 1 Corinthians 2:11. I know I have it in here somewhere, but I think I skipped ahead. Anyway, in 1 Corinthians it says the serpent deceived Eve. Okay, now, if it was just a snake, would Paul say the snake deceived Eve? In other words, why would God curse all snakes for the sin of one snake? I mean, it is true that God cursed all humanity for the sin of one human. But it just seems odd to me. Why would you curse a snake? I mean, the snake had nothing to do with it. If Satan possessed the snake, it's not the snake's fault. Anyway, that's just another reason to think that's different. Also, it said that the snake is the most subtle animal in the garden. Do you remember that at the very beginning of the temptation? If you think about animals, serpents and snakes are among the dumbest of all animals. I mean, unless they used to be really smart and God cursed them and made them dumb now, but reptiles are considered to be really weak in brain power. They have small brains and they don't socialize much. Most animals who are social animals have bigger brains and think better, not snakes. So there's just a number of reasons to doubt that it was actually a snake possessed by the devil. Also, about Satan's musical instruments. Notice that in Genesis chapter 4, after the flood. I keep getting, I skipped ahead and I got lost on my papers here. But it was the descendants of Cain who invented musical instruments. And it's quite possible then that it was the devil who helped them learn about it. Not that music is wrong. I'm not saying that. I don't take the view that all rock music or all heavy metal or all rap is satanic. But I have to believe and wonder how much influence the devil has on modern music. Just because music is his specialty. And so he knows very well what kind of music will get you going, maybe toward temptation. So I don't pretend to know what that is. I just worry about that a little bit. Yes?
I'm just thinking it was funny that Satan was given instruments, and then we're told in Genesis that Cain, one of his descendants was he who created music.
Yes, I think it was Jubal Cain, the third grandson of Cain, who invented all kinds of musical instruments. So that's a part of Satan's interest is music. So what is a cherub? The first time we met cherubim in the Old Testament is God put them at the entrance to Eden to keep the people out. Once Adam and Eve had sinned, they weren't allowed back in the Garden of Eden. And so he says he put cherubim at the entrance and a flaming sword around the tree. They don't tell us anything about what cherubim were like. Then in Exodus, God tells Moses to build the Ark of the Covenant with 2 cherubs facing inwards with their wings stretched over the center of the Ark of the Covenant. You've seen it on the Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's probably a fairly good representation of what it probably looked like. But we will discover later in the Bible that they looked a little different. They don't look like angels with their wings out. In fact, one interesting trivia piece you might think is odd, and that I thought was odd, angels are never mentioned in the Bible having wings. Nowhere. The only ones that have wings in the Bible that we know of are cherubim and seraphim, who are not called angels. They're called living creatures. So it's like God gave the animals the wings. The angels, whenever they appear, at least on earth, appear as humans. Never mentions wings. When Gabriel appears to Zacharias, no wings. When he appears to Mary, no wings. When he appears to Daniel, no wings. Now they can fly, apparently, but not with wings. So just an unusual bit of trivia. Ezekiel, though, has the detailed descriptions of cherubim. And I wrote up here the most odd thing about them. But overall, a cherub has the body of a man, 4 or 6 wings. In Ezekiel it says 4, in Revelation it says 6. Don't know why. They have eyes all over their bodies and their wings. So they see everything. Okay? And they have feet like a calf actually, so small hoofs apparently on their feet. And they glow, they're very bright colors. And here's the weird thing, is their faces. They have 4 faces. In the front is a human. On the right is a lion. On the left is an ox. And in the back is an eagle. So 4 animal faces. And they're always singing or praising God. And it seems that they carry God's throne. At least many times in the Bible, it says that God rushes to earth on his throne, and the cherubs carry him like the wind. So they seem to be all around his throne. In Revelation, it says that John saw a sea of glass, and on the sea of glass was God's throne. And around the sea of glass, the closest things to the throne were coals of fire and cherubs. 1 in front, 1 on each side, and 1 in the back. But they all face the same direction, so the human faces are all facing forward, and they all have 2 of their wings connected. So they're sort of like a diamond shape around God's throne. So those are cherubim. And in Revelation, they're called living creatures. In Ezekiel, they're called cherubim in one chapter and living creatures in another chapter. So they're the same creatures, but weird. And the reason we believe, at least I believe, and the Jews believe, they have those 4 faces, is that these are representations of the 4 living animal kingdoms on earth. Humans are supposed to be the rulers over all the animal world. Lions are the rulers of the wild beasts, wild animals. In Genesis, God created humans. He created wild beasts, domestic beasts, and birds and fish. The birds and fish both go in with the eagle, we believe, because they were created on the same day. But the domestic animals are represented by oxen. So these are sort of the heads of the 4 living kingdoms. It's interesting that God would have that around his throne. And it's also interesting, and not a coincidence, I would say, that in Ezekiel, in Revelation, and in Genesis chapter 6, rainbows are prominent. Every time we see God's throne, it talks about all the rainbows. Now, what is the purpose of a rainbow? God remembers his covenant with Noah to never destroy the earth again. So God keeps the cherubim, perhaps these 4 living creatures, as his reminder that the earth is going to be his footstool and that all life will be under his dominion when he returns in his glory. So that's one of the purposes of the cherubim on the rainbows, is sort of to remind God, as if he needs reminding, but it's a picture to us that he will never forget. All right, so those are cherubim / living creatures. And as I mentioned, they're never called angels. In Revelation 5:11, when John sees heaven, he says, I heard the many angels around the throne, the living creatures, and the elders. They're separate. In other words, living creatures are not angels. Cherubim are not angels. They are angelic beings in the sense that they live forever, and they can be in God's presence. So they are angelic beings, but they're not angels. Angels seem to be a little lower. I hate to say lower, but they're different, and they're not as close to God's throne. And God says angels are ministers to humans on earth. The purpose of angels, I believe it says that in Hebrews, that they are ministering servants. Well, that means they go to earth. God doesn't send the cherubim to earth very often, and when he does, it's not to minister to people. I don't think cherubim, if you saw a cherubim, you'd be pretty terrified. Even if you see an angel, you're terrified. But you remember also, we're told in Hebrews that sometimes you entertain angels unaware. They can look like humans. They can take away their glowiness, so to speak, and just appear normal humans. And so, well, I don't know if any of you guys would be, I don't think so. Yes?
So if you're in a situation and God brings someone into that situation to help you through something, could that be considered an angel in human form?
Okay, the question is, if someone comes and helps you, could you consider that an angel in human form? Well, if it's a total stranger, someone you've never met, and you perhaps never meet again, it's quite a possibility.
Yeah.
If it's just someone from our church, you know it's just us ministering to each other. That's one of the purposes of us.
The reason I brought that up is because years ago when I went to my stepdad's funeral, my airplane, the connecting flight got lost and everything. And this gentleman, he is very sweet, and he goes, "I'll meet you in the airport in the morning because we stayed at the hotel. We stayed at a hotel instead of getting a meal." And he was with me through the whole thing. From the time that we landed in St. Louis and it got on the connecting flight, and then when we finally got to Peoria, my sisters weren't there. He goes, "Let me go put my stuff out in the car and I'll come back." I don't remember his name. I don't remember what he looks like. And I always felt that God brought him in my life at that time to be with me because I was by myself. Mike wasn't with me when I had to go back to my dad's funeral. So that's why I brought that.
Those are the sorts of things that angels can do and will do. You might remember that after Jesus was tempted, it says the angels came and ministered to him. I don't think that means just spirit beings landed and cheered him up. I think people brought him food or something and made him feel better physically. So yes, angels can take a physical form, whereas cherubim never appeared to take a physical form that we know of. They may actually already be a physical form. That's why they're called living creatures, animals. So some just interesting things about angels we're learning about. Now, as of Lucifer, why is he called a cherub? Because we're never told that he has 4 faces, eagle, ox, human, or lion. It never says that. So what it does say is that he's a serpent or a dragon. Now, my theory is that what we have in our visions of the cherubim are 4. Those 4 are the same, and they each have 4 faces. But Lucifer was different. He was called the one who covered. So perhaps he was a dragon form. He had giant wings to sort of cover the throne while he was singing and playing music, and that music would be all over heaven or the mountain in Eden. So I think he was the musical dragon. Now, this is just speculation, but it makes the most sense to me. He is called a cherub, which makes him a living creature. He is not an angel per se, I believe. He's an angelic being, but he's more animal than human in a sense. Well, when his rebellion failed, he went straight to Eden, and this is where he got his greatest victory. His civil war in heaven failed. He's thrown out, thrown to earth, and it seems to imply from the fall of the demons, when they're thrown to earth, almost like God clipped their wings, in a sense. In other words, earth is where they will stay. They don't get to go to heaven anymore. So I don't think demons fly into heaven anymore. And I don't think Satan flies into heaven. I think if God wants to talk to Satan, maybe he sends some angels down to bring him up. Or maybe he gives him the power temporarily to fly. But that might also be implied in Revelation, where it talks about the devil being in chains and the demons being in chains. In other words, they're trapped on earth. It's just one possibility also. But in Eden, he got his greatest victory. He was unable to conquer heaven, so he decided to conquer earth. And all he had to do was cause the first man to fail. If he caused Eve to fail, but Adam did not fail, he would not have won. I mean, he would have won a partial victory, but all humanity would not forever be in sin, if only Eve had sinned. But Adam went right along with it, so that's just a what if he hadn't. Well, by Genesis 6, the devil, the adversary, has pretty much conquered the world. Everyone is wicked except one guy and his kids and their wives, Noah and his sons and daughters-in-law. Yes?
Question. it does say that there is an accuser that accuses people and he's there with God. Who is that?
Yes, that is Satan. We will discuss. I believe that God summons Satan to heaven. I don't think that Satan just goes to heaven whenever he wants. But the only one we know of that goes is the Satan. So I'm guessing that's his main job. He's the boss, and he delegates to demons all the lesser things on earth. But I don't think he lives in heaven. I think he spends most of his time on earth. He says in Job, where God says, where have you been? Oh, I've been walking around the earth to and fro, checking things out. So he's on earth most of the time, but God lets him come to heaven sometimes to accuse us. It's also in Zechariah. He accuses the high priest Zechariah in heaven. So Satan periodically gets to go to heaven. Yes?
Okay, your dad has always said that, when we're tempted, when we sin, Satan will say, Fran did it again, basically, and Jesus says, no, I paid for that. So then my way of thinking that, does that mean Satan actually, from what you're saying, go up and say, okay, Fran sinned again, but no, I paid that price? That be the same?
Well, I think that the question is, does Satan individually accuse us before God whenever we sin? I don't think that would be possible for him because there's too many people and not enough time to accuse every Christian all the time we sin. I think what that means is that as representatives, Satan often goes to heaven and accuses all of us in one blanket statement. Also, for instance, Peter, you remember Jesus tells Peter, Satan has asked permission to sift you like wheat, but I've prayed for you. Was it really the Satan? Maybe, maybe not. Was Peter important enough to really cause? Maybe. But I suspect that for most of us, we will probably never personally meet Satan. I doubt that any of us are important enough in the world scheme of things that he's going to say, ooh, I got to watch out for that Kistler guy. I'm guessing that he's got some lower level demons who are good enough for me. Famous people, maybe Billy Graham or the Pope or somebody who has lots of power. I'm guessing that he spends his time most wisely at the place where he can do the most damage. We're not important enough for that at the moment. So I suspect we have representatives of Satan. So they probably accuse us to the devil, and when the devil goes to heaven, he accuses us all. Okay? So anyway, the world is taken over by wickedness. God sends a flood and kills them all. The only people who survive are the godly people and the animals, representatives of the animals. So God, it says he was angry at all the violence. The whole earth was filled with violence, and so he destroyed it. Well, then after that, did he give up? No. Guess what happened next? The Tower of Babel. God tells the people, spread over the earth and make my kingdom earth-wide. That was the plan for the church to do. And instead, the devil says, oh, no, you don't want to spread out. You'll be weak. The best way to be strong is to be together. And so he keeps them all together, and they start a goal of building a tower that'll reach into heaven and overthrow God. It's pretty silly when you think about it to us, but they built a giant ziggurat. God confused their languages, and then they all spread just like he wanted them to. So the moral of the story, so to speak, is every time the devil does something and seems to have a victory, it's only a battle. It's not the war. Satan wins a lot of battles, but he never wins the war. When Adam and Eve fell, Satan thought maybe God was going to kill them. God didn't kill them. They fell into sin. They were in darkness, but God promised they would be saved. There would be a Savior coming. And isn't it interesting that the promise to Eve is that the seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head and the serpent will bruise his heel. So the devil now knows from this prophecy that God is planning to send another human. Someone will be born to harm Satan. And so what does he do with Cain and Abel? He tempts Cain to kill Abel. Abel turns out to be the righteous boy. Satan might be thinking, hey, this might be the guy who's going to hurt me. So he gets Cain to kill him. He inspires. In fact, God says, watch out, the devil is creeping at the door. And Cain doesn't listen and invites the devil in, basically, and kills Abel. So it appears that Satan's early strategy was to destroy people, because one of these humans will potentially be my destroyer. And so his early goal seems to be killing people. But he learns eventually that God's not going to let him kill everybody. and that's not the purpose, so he ends up corrupting people. It seems that Satan's two strategies are kill somebody so they go to hell, or kill somebody so they go to heaven and don't influence my people on earth. Killing is a good way to get rid of a good influence. Or to make sure that your poker chips get into your pocket and don't get stolen by God. He's learned that God steals some of his servants. Satan gathers servants on the earth, and they're his slaves until God takes them away from him. So by killing someone, he either sends them straight to hell, so to speak, or he sends them to heaven and they're not interfering with me anymore. But when that doesn't work, he tries to corrupt. And he is not allowed to kill everybody. We will see that in Job when God tells Satan exactly how far he can go. This far and no further is what he says about the ocean waves. He tells the proud waves to stop right there on the beach. Well, when Satan wants to do something, he has to have permission. So he either kills you or he corrupts you. And corruption is the more common way of getting Christians out of his hair, so to speak. So the Tower of Babel fails. And guess what? If we're correct about our idea of Job, Job probably lived about 200 years after the Tower of Babel. Very soon, which is only 300 years after the flood. And this is one reason why Job's friends have this idea that God kills the wicked and saves the righteous. Because the greatest example of that in human history was the flood. God saved the righteous and killed the wicked. And so this has become part of their theology. The trouble is that taking circumstances, things that God does, and taking that as normative, this is the way God must always work because this is how he did it at the flood. It's not true. God did the flood for certain particular purposes and promised never to do it again. So anyway, Job is just a few hundred years after the flood and after the Tower of Babel. And both of those cases show God judging the wicked and promoting the righteous. That's one reason. Oh, here's that verse, 2 Corinthians 11:3. I am afraid that, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, your minds will be led astray. The serpent deceived Eve, okay, by his craftiness. That doesn't sound like any snake I've ever heard of. Everyone agrees it was the devil. The question is, was it the devil in his own person as a serpent, the dragon, or was it the devil as a possessing an animal? I believe that Satan was a dragon. He lived on the mountain of God, and the reason Eve wasn't afraid of him is she had seen him up there. And same with Adam. They had no reason to believe he was evil. There was no evil on the earth, and here's this dragon up on the mountain singing. You think they don't hear him singing or playing his musical instruments? And so when he came and talked to them, they weren't surprised and had no reason to fear him. Just my theory. Yes?
See, that's like, and they say the tree of good and evil is an apple, but it doesn't say it's an apple. And just like Jonah, they say it's a whale. That, people think it's a whale. It's not a whale, it's a big fish.
Right.
So kind of the same thing,
If you're curious, the ancient Jews believed that the fruit of the tree of good and evil was the pomegranate. Which, one reason they think that is because it's so hard to open. In other words, God didn't want to make it real easy for them. If they're going to break the law, they actually have to rip this thing apart to get to it. Anyway, that's what they think is pomegranates, not apples.
Don't the high priest have pomegranates on the
Yes, isn't that interesting? That's one reason they think that. The high priest's robe has hanging pomegranates on the hem of his robe. Why? Maybe because it was the forbidden fruit. I don't know. It's a possibility. Good reason to go buy a pomegranate, huh? I'm not trying to tempt you, by the way. Okay, so if in fact Satan was the serpent, then he was cursed for what he did to Eve and Adam, and his legs were taken away. And so thus, he's gone from walking dragon to slithering dragon. And if I'm correct about him not just going to heaven whenever he wants, perhaps his wings were clipped. And so he's pretty much earthbound. And it is interesting that what he answers God is not, I've been flying around the earth, I've been walking around the earth, or going to and fro. So it doesn't say he was flying. Anyway, that's just another piece of interest. So now we'll continue. That was all of our review. Let's go to Job 6 through 8 again, 1, 6 through 8. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Now every day it says the angels show up to present themselves before God, to report to God. Although this meeting happens every day, apparently this is a routine in heaven, it does not mean, in my opinion, I suspect, it does not mean that every angel appears every day on that day to see God. In other words, God sends angels on long missions, and they don't come back every day. One for sure we know of is Gabriel. Gabriel told Daniel, I came to see you long ago, but I was captured by the demons and held prisoner, and Michael came and freed me. He was there 40 days. So Gabriel did not go every day back to heaven to report. He was stuck. I'm guessing, though, what it means is that angels report in heaven to God every day. I also do not expect you to believe that every angel reports to God every day. Not only because they're on long missions, I don't think that every angel reports directly to God. It talks about principalities and powers. We hear about archangels and elders and cherubim and seraphim. I suspect that just like our military or just like our church system, there are levels of authority. And so the lesser angels, so to speak, report to their major. And the majors report to the colonels. And the colonels report to the generals. And then the generals report to God. Because there are probably billions of angels. We don't know exactly how many there are. I have it written down here in a couple of verses. In Revelation 5:11, it says that John saw 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of angels. Now, if you add all those up and take them literally, that's millions of angels. Now, you could say that just means innumerable angels. That could be. He's not trying to give us an exact number. It's not like God is necessarily wedded to things in millions. He's got 1 million of this kind and 1 million of that kind and 1 million of that kind. No, it just means there's tons of angels. Daniel 7:10 uses those same words, 1,000 thousands and 10,000 times 10,000. Okay, so millions at least. Now, if you take the guardian angel argument, Jesus says, when he's talking about children, you better not mess with these kids because each of them has a guardian angel in heaven who protects them. If you take that literally, which is a possibility, then every human must have a guardian angel, or at least every child of God has a guardian angel. So there could be billions. Right now we have, I think, 7.5 billion people on Earth. So if every human has one angel, that's 7.5 billion. If every Christian has an angel, if you count Catholics, that's 1.5 billion. Because they're 1 billion. Catholics are 1 billion. So I don't know where you draw the line. All you can say is that there are lots and lots of angels, and 1/3 of them are evil. Did that take away the guardian angels? I don't know. I mean, did God make enough for every human who ever lived, but then 1/3 of them fell, so 1/3 of us are missing our guardian angels? I doubt it. So I think he's got extra. Anyway, these are just speculations. So all these angels did not mean they all speak to God. There are ranks of angels, and so low-level angels talk to high-level angels, and high-level angels talk to God. I doubt that they even go through the living creatures. The living creatures are always just saying, holy, holy, holy. So I don't think they bother with that. They're not in the line of reporting. They don't have to report to God because they're always there. They've got nothing new to tell him that he doesn't know already. And this is another interesting point, by the way. If God is omniscient, which we believe he is, why does he need angels to report to him? He already knows everything they know and more. It's just the way it is. It's just the way he wants it. They report to him because they're his servants, and it's just like us. God knows exactly more, in fact, of what we should be praying about than we do. When we pray, we don't tell him anything he didn't know before. So why does he ask us? Because he wants us to come to him. I'm guessing it's the same sort of thing. He just wants his servants to come around and tell him the news from their point of view. So the text, though, says, on one of those days, the Satan also came among them. Now, I would guess, this is just speculation, but I would guess that the crowd of angels and angelic beings got real quiet. Because most likely, they haven't seen him in a while. He was thrown out of heaven, and now he's back. So what's going to happen? Is this another civil war? I doubt that that's what they thought, but you would guess all eyes are on the adversary. You don't get the dragon in heaven too often. I don't think there are any other dragons. None are ever mentioned. So the dragon shows up. Just like we would get nervous, let's say Vladimir Putin walked into the Capitol in Washington with his bodyguard. He's a powerful foreign dictator. Is he going to do something stupid? What's he up to? You'd be on alert if the enemy showed up in your home. So you can imagine maybe Michael the archangel is holding his sword a little tighter than usual, ready to jump into action. But this is also why I suspect that Lucifer was summoned, because it doesn't seem like he's too happy about being there, does it? The Bible seems to teach that demons are doomed to stay on the earth until Judgment Day, and Satan is supposedly crawling on his belly on earth. So I'm guessing, speculating, that Satan needed help to come to God. I don't think, unless God just said, okay, you can fly today, and he flew. I suspect that God sent some angels down there to grab him and drag him up before the Lord, like a prisoner, like an angry cur, dog. So anyway, the angel shows up, the evil angel. And this reminded me a little bit of my job. I was a deputy sheriff reserve 30 years ago. And one of my jobs was bailiff, and I was supposed to go in there and get the prisoners out of the cell and take them up to the courtroom for their hearing. And they're usually in a bad mood. They don't like being in jail, and they don't like going to see the judge. And they don't like the judge telling them that they're bad boys. So they're always in a bad mood. I'm suspecting the devil was in heaven and he didn't like it. What would it do for him to be in heaven? It would remind him of what he lost. He used to be the most powerful of all the angels, and now he's a slug that has to get carried to heaven by Michael and the other angels. If you think of a dragon without legs or wings, what is he? He's a slug. So anyway, they bring Satan up to God. And God asks him where he asks the brat angel where he's been hanging out. What have you been up to? And here's Satan's answer. I've been walking around the earth to and fro. Now, God knows very well where Satan's been. If you don't think God has 1,000 angels watching the devil all the time, I think you'd be mistaken. There's eyes on him all the time, what he's up to make sure he's not violating what God told him to do. God told him he can only go this far. The angels are there making sure he only goes that far. He's under guard. So anyway, Satan's under constant surveillance would be my guess. The devil has no secrets from God. So God knows very well where he's been. So Satan is not being asked, where have you been, so that God can learn the truth. No, God just wants the devil to speak. Everything God does is for his own glory, and he's got plans to use the enemy for his own purposes. This is why he allows Satan to accuse us, because then God can get glory when he fails. So in other words, God wants all the angels to know, okay, I brought the devil up, and I'm going to send him on a mission. Okay? This isn't the devil. A lot of people have this idea. We'll talk more about this, that this is a great poker game in heaven. And that Satan goes up and says, I'm all in. I think Job's going to fail. And if I win, I get this prize. And if you win, you get that prize. No, I don't think the devil wanted this test. But here he is, and he's got to answer God. God doesn't ask you a question. Notice that God spoke first. If the devil was really being insolent and was in charge, he would speak first. God has to ask him a question. I don't think he's allowed to speak until asked a question. And when he answers the question, he's kind of insolent about it. That's why I think he wasn't too happy. His reply is, I've been wandering around on the earth. Well, of course you've been wandering around on the earth. What else can you do? You're stuck on the earth. So this is just a dumb answer. This was the penalty of his rebellion. The holy angels threw the bad angels out of heaven, and now they're trapped on earth. So I don't think he's happy about it, and neither are the demons. In fact, Jesus in the Gospels, when he talks to demons, none of them sound happy. Are you here to send us to hell early? What are you doing here right now, Son of God? They're not happy to see Jesus. When they're cast out of humans, Jesus says they wander through dry places seeking rest, but finding none. That's Matthew 12:43. So the demons on earth are very unhappy, and their goal is to make us unhappy too. That's one of the reasons that they're bothering us. So the devil's being insolent, and he doesn't answer the question in detail. If you're the boss at a business, and you ask your employee, what you been doing today? And he says, nothing, wandering around. You're not going to be too happy with the answer. It means he's not doing anything. He's not doing his job. So the devil's just being insolent. So now read the next part. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? So you can imagine the devil's here and he's unhappy. He doesn't like being summoned into God's presence. And God makes it more uncomfortable for him. Oh, you think you're in charge of the earth, you're wandering around down there. What about Job? You're not in charge of him. He fears me. He's blameless and upright. You're really a big screw up. It's basically what he's saying to the devil. You haven't bothered Job at all. This is kind of a taunt. Thus Satan has been unable to corrupt Job. Most of the humans on earth are slaves to sin. After the Tower of Babel, the people spread, but they're still wicked, most of them. But here's Job, and he's not wicked. So here's how the devil replies. He's angry. So Satan answered the Lord, saying, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the works of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." Okay, so the devil, he makes excuses for his failure to corrupt Job. He's whining. "I can't do anything to Job because you're protecting him all the time." Wah! That's the devil's attitude here. "You won't let me touch him. No wonder he loves you. You've made him rich. Anybody who's rich would love you." Well, that's a lie. That's what you call a half-truth. Now, the hedge, this is a metaphor, I believe. It has to be a metaphor. Obviously, there's no literal fence around Job. No, this hedge is a metaphor for the barrier of angels who are keeping him safe from harm. God's got guardian angels protecting Job, protecting his kids, protecting his flocks, his home, everything. And the devil's angry because he has no influence, no way to get to Job. So the loyal angels are all protecting him. So in front of all the other angels, Lucifer makes a challenge to God. He flat out claims that Job only loves you because of his wealth, and if God took away all of Job's wealth, then Job would curse God to his face. And this is actually the way he phrases it. He will surely curse you to your face. He is swearing. "I swear to you, God, he will fall if you take away his wealth." Okay? He's swearing. Now, Satan is not a fool. He doesn't make wild, unsubstantiated claims, to be honest, most of the time. It is true that a vast majority of rich people are not lovers of God. Jesus himself said that it is harder for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle than to enter the kingdom of God. In other words, it is highly unlikely that a rich person can be a Christian. Okay? Not impossible, as Jesus said, but unlikely. So the devil, who is a long-time observer of human existence, he's now watched over 1,000 years of wicked people. In his experience, he sees rich people fall all the time. So in his mind, Job must just be another one of those guys. And as soon as you give him any trouble, he's going to collapse like an egg. Be like Humpty Dumpty, falling off the wall. Now, Satan has no proof that Job will fall. He just has human history. He throws this theory out there, and he hopes God will bite. He hopes God will let him torture Job a little bit because he loves making people miserable. If he can't kill Job, at least he can make him miserable. Well, if Job falls, his shining example of godliness will fail. It says he was one of the richest men of the whole East. Everybody knew or had heard of Job. And so if Job falls, God will be defamed on earth. That's what he wants. Now, many people do misrepresent this scene to malign God. There's a Bible called the Action Bible. It's for kids, and they call this story of Job God's wager. It's become very common in sermons and discussions about God having this poker game with Satan. Like we're nothing but poker chips, and he'll give up 10 Christians if the devil will give him something. That is ridiculous. God does not trade his people like poker chips. But that's the way it gets represented by atheists and moron liberals. Skeptics always say God doesn't really love people. He just uses us like pawns in his chess game, and we're all just ready to be sacrificed so that he can win the game. That's not what we see here. First of all, Satan does not make the challenge. God makes the challenge. God brings Satan into heaven, and when Satan doesn't say anything useful, God brings up the subject of Job. I mean, if God didn't want Satan to go tempt Job, why even bring it up? Why even bring Satan up here? This was the plan. God planned everything in eternity past. And it is his plan to get glory from Job while the devil fails. And this will become a book in the Bible. So this is all part of God's plan. It's not some big poker game. In a poker game, one of the problems is you have no idea if you're going to win. There's a lot of luck involved. There is some skill involved in poker. You can get better at it. But the fact is you could lose no matter how good you are. The best football teams still lose once in a while. So a poker game implies chance. God doesn't know what's going to happen. Maybe Job's going to fall. He's taking a gamble. No, he's not. He already knows Job is not going to fall. So he brings the devil in. Yes?
I think along the lines of what you're saying too, it's all, I think it's seen here that Satan has considered Jacob. He knows he's got a hedge around him. He knows that God has given him these blessings. So there's probably a level of frustration from Satan too already. Sure, I've considered it. What am I gonna do? You've given him all these protections.
Yes, Satan does know Job very well. In fact, he hates Job because he's so famous and he's a godly man. He's a terrible example to all of his wicked slaves on earth. So Satan's has been obviously testing the hedge, and he can't get in. So he's got to get God's permission to get through the hedge. That's why God brings him up so he can give him permission. So God's going to use this to make glory. Everything God does is for his glory. He knows and plans the future. God already knows that Job will be tested and he will survive. God knows Job will survive these disasters and the rotten friends. And God plans to have someone write a long poetic book about the whole story to tell us all about why he did it, what was going on in the background. You know, Job never found out. Until the book got written, we had no idea what happened, unless Job wrote the book himself and learned it that way. So this is God's plan so that millions of people, millions of believers in the future will have a good book to read. You can't call this a poker game. God already knows he's going to win. If the history of the world, as shown in the Bible, proves anything to us, it is that the devil always loses. I mean, he can win a small battle, but he never wins the war. God doesn't allow that. He might have thought that bringing down the human race through Adam and Eve was his great victory. But was it? Was that a satanic victory? Well, it was a small victory, but not ultimately a victory, because first the devil lost the war in heaven. He rushed into Eden and turned humans into his slaves. But guess what? That was God's plan all along. This wasn't a surprise to God. Oh no, look what happened. What am I going to do now with these stupid people? No, that's not what he did. He already knew. So God planned to gain glory by redeeming some of Satan's slaves for thousands of years through his son, Jesus Christ. That was his plan. God is able to show himself more glorious, more attributes that he has by being merciful. If Adam and Eve had never sinned, we would all be happy living on earth with the animals in peace. We'd all be naked vegetarians. That was the way it was set up. That's what would have happened if Adam and Eve hadn't fallen. And God would be the ruler of the earth. But some aspects of his character wouldn't show. Justice, mercy. I mean, we'd have his love, we'd have his happiness, we'd see his holiness, but we would never learn these other aspects of God. So we had to, it's kind of like, I think of the Star Wars trilogy, the first three, okay? If you guys know the Star Wars trilogy, the first one, the rebels win a big battle and destroy the Death Star. The second one, the Empire Strikes Back, it's all dark. Luke loses an arm. Han Solo's frozen in carbonite. The rebel base is taken. It looks dark and gloomy. And then the third one, the rebels make a comeback and win again. That's the classic story for all of history. That's what books are all about. Protagonist, that's your main character. Problem. There's got to be a big problem for him to solve, and then when he solves it, that's the happy ending. That's how stories work. And the story, history, God's story, is good things, disaster, fixed. That is the story of every story in human history. You can't write a book without that. And I think that's why God allowed the fall. That's the only way to show his glory this way. And the devil is one part of him allowing the darkness so that he can bring back light. You remember what it said of Jesus? That when the Messiah comes, the people living in darkness would see a great light. There is no light without darkness. And Satan is the darkness. So don't think that the devil is living in the lap of luxury and enjoying himself all the time on earth. He is tormented by his losses. He has lost his future. His future is bleak. And every day, God steals more of Satan's servants. And that makes him really angry. But once in a while, God calls Satan into heaven. And he gives him a thankless task so that he can embarrass himself again. Oh, you want to accuse some of my people? Okay, go see if you can. Do you remember Rome? In Rome, they were taking Christians, dipping them in wax, and lighting them up as candles in the garden for the emperor. That's the work of the devil. Okay? And what did it do? It made Christianity spread like wildfire around the world. The martyrs were a dark way of bringing God more glory. That's how God uses Satan. Satan is always used, and he always loses. And he must hate that. He's just God's servant in an angry way, is all it is. The rest of the angels work for God in a happy way. They're delighted to do God's will. The devil does God's will, and he hates every minute of it. So Satan loses souls every day. But once that soul turns to Jesus, it never turns back. Never. No one and nothing can take the soul away from the love of God. So, it says that in Romans 8. So, Satan's got to know that if Job really is a Christian or a believer, he won't turn. But he's got to try. And he does. And he makes his best effort, as we will see soon. The devil is not stupid. You see, the devil, though, cannot tell if you're a Christian always. There may be indications, hopefully you have some fruit in your life, but you could still be a wicked sinner disguising yourself. You only go to church because you want people to think you're a Christian. So the devil doesn't know for sure, and so he's happy if he can kill you. But if God won't let him kill you, he can at least corrupt you. And so the devil tries his luck on everybody, and that's how we find out, really, who is with God. If Job is really a godly person just because he's rich, or if he's a godly person because he's saved. And if you think of Peter, when Jesus told Peter Satan sought permission to sift him like wheat, and Jesus prayed for Peter, he said, but Satan did hit Peter really hard. He didn't sift him like wheat. And Peter faltered, but like a weeble, he didn't fall. You remember weebles? They were a toy when I was a kid. I don't know if you young guys know about them. Weebles are heavy, egg-shaped things with weight on the bottom. And no matter how hard you hit them, they keep standing up because their weight's on the bottom. Any godly person is a weeble. He might fall over, but he never stays there. He comes right back up. That's what happened to Job, and that's what happened to Peter. So if Satan attacks us and we stumble, we don't fall. Jesus will not allow us to permanently fall. We may fall for a while, but we will come back up. And so next week, we will talk about more aspects of this heavenly scene in Job chapter 1. Dave, would you close us in prayer?
Oh, blessed Father, we thank you for this day that you've given us, for gathering us here. We thank you for our pastor, for this lesson. May you guide us with these words and help us to follow you in righteousness. We thank you again in Jesus' name.
So we'll have our worship at 11 in about 35 minutes.
He said, "Oh, he was bad."
Who said he was? Wasn't he?
Where does it say?
Well, he broke in pieces. I don't know, all the picture books show it.
Pomegranate, if I'm not mistaken, all what they eat are seeds.
Yes.
So it would
Oh, he said everything that makes
everything that
seeds.
has seeds you can